irks me that a lot of video games, especially the cash cows, get so much love in the modern world, while several others aren't as successful or are just too obscure to count. These types of games often get swept under the rug and never see the light of day, either due to oversaturation or just that the consumer hates the game for all it's worth, or simply forget its existence. And that's why I'm here as I talk about my top 10 underappreciated video games. Enjoy!
Zero, please, don't fight with my brother! If you do, I'm afraid that one of you may end up...
Someone must stop Repliforce!
Zero!
Starting off the list is the puzzle platformer that has been left in the dust since 1991, Interplay's brainchild, the Lost Vikings. I'd say it's a relative to Lemmings, as they both tend to keep you on your toes as you come up with brain teasers as you plow through each level. Except unlike Lemmings, you only play as the trio of peaceful Vikings, rather than barbaric ones. Eric, Balog, and Olaf, each with their own unique abilities. There was a sequel later on, but it was pretty much left on the shelf afterwards. The levels may be difficult, especially since you have a small limit of hit points, and the passwords are immemorable unless you write them down, but it's still fun nonetheless. I mean, if Zelda's not much of a problem, then maybe they should be given another chance. I like this game since I was a kid, whether it be the variety of environments or skills, or trying to solve the different obstacles, or even the kick-ass soundtrack. For almost 30 years now, I've never heard of a new installment. It may seem dated, but I find some potential in their own SNES series. Another obscure gems for the SNES's predecessor, Crystalis. Much like the Vikings, it does allow the player to interact with the environment and strategize. It's one of those obscure and forgotten action-adventure games since Star Tropics, as they're often overshadowed by Zelda or even Dragon Warrior. You play as the solo protagonist Simiya, a robot awakened in a dystopian future 100 years later, and to save the world from evil. It may sound rather cliché, but at least it's not as repetitive as the Blue Bomber. Much like the last entry, no one talks about it, and it seems a little obsolete. Despite the final bosses are like button mashy, and the remake for the Game Boy Advance was infuriating since the resolution was too small, thus never seeing any projectiles fly at you. But at least the translations were far better. Also, some of the bugs could have been worked out more. If you happen to relive some classic NES games, give this Underdog a try. Trust me, you will not be too disappointed. Another NES classic that happens to be unnoticed is Super Mario Bros. 2. It has received so much negativity since its release, and it's unfair considering how unique it was in the Juggernaut. Instead of just Mario or Luigi, you play as the quartet of heroes, featuring the Mario Bros. Along with Toad and Princess Toadstool. I was ecstatic playing as the latter three, each having different abilities and mechanics. How awesome is that, playing with other underrated characters, making them useful? And instead of going from repetitive castle to castle finding Bowser, Nintendo wanted to try something new, with the Big Bad Frog Wart at the Dreamworld Subcon, which later got introduced as a stage since Melee. Sure, it was roughly based on Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic in Japan, and it was re-released as Super Mario 2 in the West. All because we never had the actual Mario 2 till much later, known as the Lost Levels, which we had in All-Stars. It was proven to be difficult, hence the little tangent detour. And may I say, I'm actually glad this existed. Even when it was remastered for the SNES and soon the Game Boy Advance. I always find the second installment to be the ugly duckling in the Mario Cluster mug. But hey, at least the developers were more lenient compared to the frustrating Zelda installment, or that for Castlevania. I would pick up this little gem over those dreaded ball-busting NES difficulty games any day of the week. Back in 1990 and early 1991, the 16-bit console war was underway, and to test the waters with the brand new Nintendo Entertainment System along with its Mode 7 capabilities, there was a plethora of games to choose from. Aside from the Lost Vikings, there's been a couple others coming up on the list, and one of them was Drakkhen. Kemco was on fire at that time, aside from developing Lagoon, Shadowgate, and even Top Gear, a racing game of all things. And this game's no exception. You get to customize your own stats with the 4 main characters in your team, including a fighter, scout, magician, and priest. Something the original Final Fantasy sort of lacked. Your mission is to collect the 8 tiers from the royals throughout the continent. Think of Games of Thrones before there was actually Game of Thrones. Literally. With dragons and kingdoms warring against each other, and to keep the peace while hunting down half-breeds called Drakkhens, half human, half dragon. It may seem obscure for an RPG, especially with the sandbox-like structure, and the plot's a little cryptic, but once you get the handle down, it can be a real fun adventure. The graphics may seem good for its time, but the sense of progression and soundtrack can't be beat. And you tend to have variety and customization with your characters, which other RPGs hadn't quite mastered yet. I'm very disappointed no one has ever mentioned this game. It's criminal it faded into obscurity. But for some early release titles for the SNES, it ain't too shabby like the next contender. Another obscure game back in the early 90s during the SNES's infancy was Actraiser. 1991 had just declared its first console war, and developers were really strict on interpreting religious themes. Hence, instead of God, you were named Master, and Satan was renamed Tanzra, although the roles themselves seem pretty obvious. You play as a sword and magic-wielding warrior, guided by your angel companion as you regain your lost strength and experience from the last battle. You take on the role similar to God as you perform miracles, receive prayers from the townsfolk, create life from a destroyed continent and conquer the devil and his evil forces. While I'm not too big on religion, it still makes you feel as the hero, before Link impacted me several years later. It did come up with a sequel a couple of years later, but it was just mediocre at best. I loved this game since it was released while I was 4, and it even spawned its own orchestrated album. Its smooth soundtrack, role playing, and just making the world a better place makes it stand out above the rest during the early days. And this was before Enix merged with Square and worked with Quintet, which was better back then. And I got an idea. How about a 3D remaster? Or better yet, why not introduce Master Protector in Smash Brothers? Didn't see that coming, did ya? Much like Super Mario Bros. 2 was to Mario, I find this to be the rejected outcast in the Final Fantasy series. In 1992, it was designed by Square of America, and this was their first ever project. In order to make RPGs more accessible outside of Japan, it designed it to be an entry-level RPG, as it says on the tin, or box, or whatever. This in turn gave critics and audiences a ton of disappointment, as the game wasn't as challenging as others of its kind. Plus, it's short as you can breeze through it in a matter of hours, and you can receive spells from scrolls, rather than learning them. Plus your max level is up to 51. I, on the other hand, never cared about these glaring issues. And keep in mind, this was before we had other user-friendly entries, like Pokemon and Super Mario RPG, also developed by Square. And RPGs were never my field of expertise, so it was a sort of right for me for anyone who's new to them. I'd recommend giving it a shot as their starting point for the genre, and just work up from there. With such a phenomenal soundtrack, simple mechanics, interacting with the environment, and having set battles instead of rough random encounters, I'd say it's the most underestimated installment of the Final Fantasy juggernaut, and it's one of those that does a spin-off right. I picked this up as a win-win if you ask me. Ah, Mortal Kombat. You guys are never afraid to experiment. Always trying out new features with more bloodier fatalities, a massive repertoire of fighters, and just above all standing out like the pit spikes in the fighting genre. As a beat-em-up elitist, it even tried its hand on a few spin-offs, which were really abysmal. There was no hope with each disappointing installment, even those like Mythology Sub-Zero, Special Forces, and even the movie Annihilation. Consumers were getting worried where the series would lead, but there was a light at the end of the bleak tunnel. Shaolin monks. Whew, talk about a breath of fresh air. Now that's a spin-off done right. And it's a well-earned break, especially since it was Midway's latest project. This was the perfect retelling of the original in Mortal Kombat 2, as you play as either Liu Kang and Kung Lao, saving Earthrealm from the threats of Outworld, led by Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn. It may seem repetitive, but believe me, it has more than meets the eye. For the first time in the series' history, it branched out into the action-adventure style, as well as retaining elements from RPGs like gaining experience and learning special moves. You encounter familiar faces along with hordes of nameless grunts. They are portrayed differently from the original Tangent. It has a lot to offer, including some special unlockables and Easter eggs, like a love letter to the fans of old. Hell, it even introduces co-op in which you and a friend can achieve puzzles and clobber overlords as a team. This was the pinnacle of Mortal Kombat, before 9 came to be and messed up the timeline. And this was the last hurrah for Midway, till NetherRealm Studios was forged. I would highly recommend it to any veteran or casual Mortal Kombat fan. Just like Defenders of the Realm, this do needs more praise. Even the chance to rework on its cancelled sequel, Fire and Ice, with Scorpion and Sub-Zero. If only that should happen if NetherRealm has the guts to do it. My favorite installment from the Starfox series trudges its way to the top 3, Starfox Adventures. This was treated by most consumers as the rejected kid in the crowd, always labeling it as a Zelda clone with its unique structure being outside the R-Wing's cockpit and exploring the unknown. I say it's more like a Metroid clone in that regard, and I have no qualms about it at all. Much like in Luigi's Mansion in Super Mario Sunshine, Nintendo has always wanted to experiment with something new. Although, much like Super Mario Bros. 2, it was based off of another project, a cancelled Rare project called, well, Dinosaur Planet. Miyamoto simply stamped the name Starfox on it and shipped it out to the market, which was a bit offensive to many supporting the prototype. Now that may be, but why else would he have this idea from this scene?
Who's that? I am Fox McCloud, Royal Knight of the Lilat System. I've come to take the prince back to his home. Hey, what?
Coincidence much? After all, this was Rare's final project working with Nintendo before it was assimilated by Microsoft and soon went bankrupt. Think of this as the calm before the storm, and what we were given was a fun ride. With its unique presentation, atmosphere, and style, it was a dream come true being immersed in a world of dinosaurs. I love all the characters there, aside from General Scales, the Sharp Claws, and the Lightfoot, but it's just as they say, a man's garbage is another man's treasure, and this was the best and last installment for the series, before Assault and other games let me down. I miss the risk-taking Nintendo, and this game truly delivers. Besides, there's always the demo of Dinosaur Planet if you belligerent whiners look hard enough.
Zero!
The last entry impacted me while I was a teen back in 2002, while I was a freshman. But this PS2 classic has hit me the most during that summer. The misunderstood beat-em-up, The Bouncer. Another Square entry has made the cut, although it worked over its co-developer Dream Factory. Together, they created a movie-style based game in which you, the player, take control of 3 bouncers, Sion, Bolt, and Co., to save the damsel Dominique and the world from the Mikado Corporation. This was showcased many times as an action movie-based game, as was an early title for the PS2. although the final product was met with mediocre sales ratings. It wasn't quite as stellar as reviewers were hoping for, even though it had similar FMV sequences to later titles like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy X. There were a few bugs in the system, such as the annoying ragdoll physics, awkward camera angles, elements that were cut out, such as weapons in combat, and unforgiving difficulty, and clunky controls with little response time. Despite these curves Square implanted into Dream Factory's creation, I don't see it as terrible. Far from it. Sure, it's flawed, but it's still a fun game. There's a lot of replayability once you've beaten the story, hence more plot lines for the main trio, gaining new moves, and even unlocking other characters in a free-for-all in versus and survival mode. If mastered well, while using experience points to increase stats, then wasting on special moves, it can eventually unload. Combined with the PS2's incredible hardware, aesthetics, story and character development, and soundtrack, this was the one game that stood out from a handful of them for the PS2 after my 8th grade graduation. And I created a tetralogy crossing over with another action-packer, Dragon Ball Z. If Squeenix can possibly iron out the kinks, and perhaps do a remake and potential sequel, I'll be ecstatic beyond belief. Come on, you bastards, get off the Final Fantasy Kingdom Hearts wagon, and get this black sheep done. Alright, we're on our way to number 1, but first, let's bring out some honorable mentions.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What am I fighting for?
I'm sure you were all expecting this to be on here. As a devoted F-Zero fan, this is the most underappreciated game in my eyes. Ever since its simultaneous debut with the anime of the same name, GP Legend was released in the West. Also known as Falcon Densetsu or Legend of Falcon, both the Game Boy Advance game and show received massive backlash, especially when it was aired by 4Kids on the Fox Box. Now this was before the fiascos that were One Piece and 4Kids TV, and I found both versions to be the most understood entries ever. I'm counting both since they tie into each other, as they were released in Japan in September 2003, then outside of Japan on September 2004. Just like Mystic Quest, players weren't thrilled since it was too lenient, and the plot and races seemed short and dull. But that never bothered me. I'd recommend it to any new consumer of the series, as it's a lot more user-friendly than the predecessor GX. It was rated as an early childhood game after all. At least you play as different characters in their own plots, contrary to just Falcon, which makes them have a better chance to shine. And while the races may seem too soft, with no aggressive AI and sometimes being encouraged to take shortcuts, they're far from being a downer. Despite clearing everything with minimal effort, Still, controls were intact, and it's not as merciless as Maximum Velocity. I'll consider it even better. Not to mention, if you are skilled enough, it pays homage to the original F-Zero in its own Platinum Cup. In addition, it and the anime are home to my main in the series, Rick Wheeler or Ryu Suzaku, and my all-time favorite machine, the Dragon Bird. Sure, Climax had fixed up its flaws, but sadly it was a Japanese exclusive, as GP Legend didn't sell well enough. Not only is the game underrated, but the show as well, as it aired only 15 out of 51 laps before its abrupt cancellation in favor of Sonic X and Winx Club reruns by March 2005. This was the last hurrah for the series in the States, and Suzak did an okay job. So much so that I even made so much fan art and fan fiction centered around GP Legend. It and GX had remained as my top most favorite games, and despite the numerous setbacks, I still find GP Legend as well as the series itself to be the most underappreciated gems in gaming history. I'm the Ecron writer, and GP Legend was the threshold for yearning for more F-Zero. It deserves to be out of hiatus after 17 years, 1 year longer than its development. Let us keep fighting for a new installment or remaster, and maybe air the missing English dubs Japan has hidden away from us. F-Zero shall never die as long as we keep striving for it, and for the underdogs.